My mother-in-law's prank got me fired. They laughed, but I got the last laugh after moving abroad. They say the worst moment of your life always arrives without warning. For me, it came on a Saturday morning, right in the middle of our restaurant's busiest hours. It started with the scream of a woman pretending to die. Margot, my mother-in-law, collapsed onto the table, clutching her throat as if she were choking. Her silver spoon slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a strangely cold sound. Everyone turned to look. Some guests jumped up, others shouted for help. And I, standing less than 10 steps away, knew exactly what was happening. She was acting. It was a perfectly staged performance. I saw it. The flicker in her eyes. The slight curl of her lips, just for a second, as if she was savoring every drop of chaos spreading through the room. People might have called it panic. I called it calculation. Her best friend Lori immediately shouted, "Who's in charge here? Call a doctor. We're going to sue for serving dangerous food." I suddenly felt like I'd been dragged into someone else's nightmare. Not because I made a mistake, but because I was the target. More accurately, I was the sacrifice. Margot knew that dessert contained hazelnuts. I had told her 3 times. I even wrote it down on her ticket. But she ordered it anyway. She wanted it. She wanted this moment. A second later, Paula's phone camera lit up. She was recording everything, panning her phone across the dining room to capture the panicked guests, the confused staff, and me standing there like someone helplessly watching everything I had built go up in flames in a single flash. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood still. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel the full weight of collapse. They said I was too sensitive. They laughed when I got suspended that same afternoon. They believed her version of the story. A loving mother who nearly died because of her careless daughter-in-law. But a few months later, I left that country. Quietly. Without a word. And when they realized I was no longer the Claire they used to know, the messages began pouring into my inbox. Apologies, regrets, requests for a quick conversation. I had prepared for that day. Every piece of evidence, every word, every mocking email they thought I'd never see. And one by one, they opened their inboxes. They read. They went silent. And for the first time, no one was laughing anymore. I used to think I had found a peaceful harbor. Daniel wasn't the most remarkable man, but he had a kind smile and eyes warm enough to make me believe that all the wounds of my past could finally start to heal. We met in an evening hospitality management class, both of us trying to build a future from scratch. At the time, I was just an awkward hostess working at Savory Hill, and he was a kitchen intern with dreams of opening his own bistro one day. A year later, we got married. Everyone was surprised. Not because our love was too intense, but because everything happened too quickly. His family was well off and respected in the community. His mother, Margot, was the chairwoman of a large charity, always polished in every public appearance, admired by her peers as a symbol of grace and class. My family was different. My father worked in maintenance. My mother was a gentlewoman, used to living quietly in the background. They didn't oppose our marriage, but I could sense my mom's concern when she held my hand before the ceremony. "Are you sure he's really yours?" she whispered. I nodded confidently. Now that I look back, maybe I was just trying to escape the hollowness I felt in my own family. Margot didn't object to me outright. She was far too clever for that. Instead, she disguised her disapproval with seemingly harmless questions. "So what does your father do, Claire?" "At which factory exactly?" Or during the mandatory Sunday dinners, she'd say casually, "Working in hospitality must be exhausting. I bet Daniel gets lonely." Words that sounded like concern, but always carried something sharp underneath. The longer I lived near that house, the smaller I felt. Even though Margot's house was just minutes away from ours, it felt like a fortress where I was always being weighed, compared, and told, directly or indirectly, that I wasn't enough. Daniel never really noticed it. Or if he did, he chose to ignore it. "She's just old-fashioned," he'd say. "Don't take it personally." I used to believe him. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, she would eventually accept me. So I buried myself in work. Step by step, I moved up from hostess to shift manager, then assistant manager, and finally to managing the entire food and beverage department. A position I never dared to imagine for myself before. I was the first to arrive, the last to leave. I learned how to handle crises, how to please the most difficult customers, how to manage a kitchen on the verge of collapse. I knew exactly when to order which type of seafood, and I remembered every quirky food preference of our most high-maintenance guests. That was my world. The only place where I felt heard, valued, and seen. At home, Margot was still Margot. She'd show up unannounced, question everything. From how I organized the kitchen to how I folded napkins, even down to the wine I paired for dinner. Once, when I suggested Daniel try an Italian white wine with the roast chicken, she tilted her head and smiled faintly. "Well, your taste is certainly interesting." I smiled back politely, but I couldn't sleep that night. Only Naomi, the head bartender at the restaurant, ever saw the exhaustion in my eyes. "She's not here to enjoy a meal, Claire," Naomi told me one night. "She's here to find the crack that makes you crumble." Naomi had studied psychology before switching to hospitality, and she always said the things I didn't want to admit. "Daniel needs to grow up," she added. "He's not a man. He's a grown boy hiding between two women and avoiding every single hard decision." I didn't respond. I just buried myself deeper in reports, inventory adjustments, and weekend planning. I believed if I could keep things steady at work, everything else would somehow hold together too. I was wrong. A week before that fateful day, Daniel told me Margot had requested a brunch reservation at the restaurant. She was bringing her two closest friends, Lori and Paula. "Mom said to make sure she gets the best table," he said. "And she asked that you dress professionally. They want to see you in your element." I nodded and smiled, like a machine too used to performing. But inside, something stirred. A warning I couldn't shake. And unfortunately, I was right. That Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had anything special to prepare, but because I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. I personally checked every table reservation, every order, and every ingredient. I reminded the morning kitchen staff of every detail in the menu, especially the desserts that contain nuts. I told the servers that we had VIP guests that day, but not in the usual sense. These weren't honored guests. They came with a clear purpose: to control, to examine, to belittle. Margot arrived right on time, as if she had planned every second of the day. She wore an ivory dress, her hair neatly styled, and her usual cold smile. Lori and Paula walked beside her. The three of them looked like judges walking into an audition, waiting to see when I would fail. I greeted them with a professional smile. I said it was a pleasure to serve them today. Margot tilted her head and said I looked tired and must be working too hard, her eyes scanning through my uniform like glass. I led them to the best table by the window where soft sunlight stretched across the white tablecloth. As soon as they sat down, the complaints began. The table was too cold. The coffee wasn't hot enough. The bread was too soft. The menu wasn't as impressive as they had hoped. Every word seemed gentle, almost caring, but each one was a sharp little cut, slicing into my confidence piece by piece. I texted Daniel. I told him I needed him, that I just needed him to be there. He showed up 30 minutes later with a tight smile. He said Mom was just being picky and that I shouldn't stress about it. I looked at him and wished he would sit at that table just once and see it all. The digs, the performance, the look in his mother's eyes, the one he always claimed was just trying to help. But he didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to. Margot ordered the chocolate mousse for dessert. I froze for a second. I reminded her that the dish contained hazelnuts and asked if she still wanted it. She smiled sweetly and said, of course. She just remembered it being delicious. The dish was served. I quietly counted the minutes. I just needed this to pass. I could endure it. One more time. But when she took the third spoonful, she started coughing violently. Then she collapsed onto the table, her hands shaking as they gripped her throat, her eyes wide with panic. The restaurant went completely silent. Then a scream cut through the air. Lori rushed forward, shouting that someone needed to call an ambulance because she was dying. I stood there, frozen, not because of the chaos, but because I caught Margot's eyes. There was no fear in them, no pain, only satisfaction. That look, that smirk. It was like she was the audience to her own show, enjoying every second of it. And in that moment, I realized I had been cast as the villain in a story she had written a long time ago. Paula had already pulled out her phone and was recording everything. She swept the camera across the restaurant like she was filming a documentary about a dangerous and unethical business. Margot whimpered and leaned into Daniel while he sat there watching everything unfold without saying a word. When the paramedics arrived, Margot suddenly seemed fine again. She said she thought she was okay and it was probably just panic. She refused treatment. They advised her to go to the hospital, but she signed the waiver. I knew why. Because if they tested her, they'd see she wasn't allergic at all. Mr. Whitmore, the general manager, pulled me aside. He asked what was going on. I told him everything, barely able to speak through the knot in my throat. He shook his head. He said it didn't matter who was right. What mattered was that customers were already spreading the story online. When I walked back out, the dining room was almost empty. Daniel stood next to his mother. He and Paula and Lori were watching the video she had just recorded. Paula laughed and pointed at the screen. She said I looked cold when I realized Margot was dying, like I didn't even care. I stepped closer. I reminded them the dessert had nuts and that I had warned her. 3 times. Margot blinked slowly and asked what I was talking about. She said everyone saw how much pain she was in and that it was just an allergic reaction. An unfortunate accident. Daniel turned to me, his voice full of anger. He asked if I wanted his mother to die. He said she almost died. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man who once held my hand and promised to protect me now stood there demanding that I apologize to the woman who had just humiliated me in front of the world. I said I wasn't going to apologize. I told them she wasn't allergic, that she had staged everything to destroy me. Margot took out a tissue and dabbed her eyes. She said she was disappointed to hear me say that. But maybe I was just under a lot of pressure. Daniel didn't say another word. When I got home that night, the apartment was empty, like no one had ever lived there. He didn't come back. On the table was a note. It said Mom thought I needed time to calm down, and that he'd be staying with her for a while. I sat down on the floor, in the dark, completely still. But I didn't cry. Because in that moment, I knew one thing. This wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a war, and I had just been named the target. I spent the whole weekend alone in that cold, silent apartment. No footsteps, no one calling my name like before. No one needed me anymore. And truthfully, I no longer needed anyone either. Daniel didn't say anything except for one message. Mom thinks you need some time to think. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because there was simply nothing left to say. I sat in the bedroom all night, staring out the window. The city that once felt familiar now felt suffocating, small and fake, just like the apologies I knew would never come. Early Monday morning, I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and wrote an email. To Chef Alden, my former head chef who had moved to Edinburgh the year before to open a new restaurant with a Scottish partner. Subject, looking for a fresh start somewhere far away. The email was gentle, like I wasn't in a rush. Just a polite message expressing my hope for a chance to begin again. But in every sentence, I poured what little faith I had left. An hour later, he replied, "What a coincidence, Claire. We just lost our general manager last week. If you're open to a change of scenery, I can't think of anyone better for the job." I read that sentence over and over. Something in me woke up. It wasn't excitement or hope. It was something calm and cold, like ice water. I stood up, pulled my suitcase from under the bed, and started packing my clothes. For the first time in years, I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left a note on the kitchen counter. I need space to rebuild what your family broke. Don't contact me. I'll call when I'm ready. The flight was 12 hours with a layover in Frankfurt. I didn't sleep, didn't watch movies. I just sat there in silence, leaning my head against the window, watching the city lights fade behind me. Edinburgh welcomed me with cobblestone streets, ivy-covered stone buildings, and a cold wind that cut through my coat. Chef Alden was waiting at the airport. His old hatchback and gentle smile were the only things that felt safe. He looked at me and said, "You don't look like Claire at all." I replied, "Good. I don't want to be her anymore." He arranged for me to stay in a small apartment above an old bookshop in Stockbridge. It had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a damp bathroom. But to me, it was the first place I could truly be myself. No clicking heels from Margot's hallway. No judgment hidden behind fake smiles. No Daniel with his helpless eyes and avoidant tone. Just me and no one else. I started work the very next day. The tartan table wasn't fancy like Savory Hill, but it had charm and character. The kitchen was old. The routines were chaotic. Staff worked more out of habit than system. But I realized that chaos could be an opportunity. I didn't change anything in the first week. I just observed. Quietly took notes. Who came late? Who overcooked? Who didn't know how to store produce properly? I recorded every detail in a leather notebook. In the second week, I began making small changes. Reorganized the storage, optimized shift schedules, suggested implementing the same inventory tracking system I had used before. The owner, Mr. Graham Fraser, looked at me with a mix of doubt and curiosity. But when the bills started shrinking, customer reviews improved, and the staff began going home earlier without feeling exhausted, he started changing too. "You're a witch in the kitchen," he joked. "You did in 1 week what I couldn't manage in 3 years." I smiled. I didn't argue. I had once been pushed away from the table. Now I was building one of my own. I didn't need anyone's permission. Bit by bit, I became Claire again. But a different Claire. I cut my hair short. Replaced stiff office dresses with thick sweaters, scarves, and waterproof boots. I learned to say I instead of yes and call people love like the locals did. Every night I sat at my tiny kitchen table and typed out everything that had happened. I saved every old message. The emails Daniel had sent his mother where they mocked my failures. The audio recording of my last meeting with Mr. Whitmore. Even the security video Naomi had secretly sent me of Margot, moments after her fake episode, walking calmly to the restroom to fix her lipstick. I didn't know yet what I'd do with all of it. But I knew one day I would need it. And when that day came, I would be ready. 10 months after I left, the sky over Edinburgh seemed bluer than usual. That was also the day Mr. Graham Fraser made me an official offer. Not just a thank you, but an opportunity to become a business partner. "Tartan Table has never seen steady profit like this," he said. "I need someone reliable to lead it when I retire. Would you want to be that person?" I nodded. No hesitation. No second thoughts. That evening, I posted my first photo on social media since I vanished. It was a shot of the Edinburgh sky at sunset with a short caption, "New beginnings." Within 24 hours, the messages started to come in. The first was from Daniel. "You're in Edinburgh? We need to talk." I didn't respond. A week later, Margot sent an email. It was long, formal, polite, and very calculated. "Dear Claire, we're truly happy to see you found a new path. Coincidentally, our church women's group is taking a trip to the UK, and Edinburgh is one of our stops. Perhaps we can meet again. Maybe you can recommend a restaurant and help us plan our visit. If you could also arrange a meal at the restaurant you're working at, that would be wonderful." I read every line carefully and smiled. She hadn't changed. But I had. I didn't respond immediately. I took time to prepare. Thoroughly. With precision. Not a single detail left undone. I drafted a separate email for each of them. One for Margot, one for Daniel, one for Paula, one for Lori, one for Mr. Whitmore. Each message came with a folder named after them, containing clear, undeniable evidence of what they had done to me. I scheduled all of them to be delivered at exactly 12 noon, the moment Margot's group would arrive in Edinburgh. That afternoon, Daniel came first. I agreed to meet him at a cafe near the Royal Mile. He was already there when I arrived, nervously holding a lukewarm coffee. When he saw me, he stood up like someone waiting for forgiveness. "You look completely different." "Good," I said, sitting down across from him, "because I'm not the same person anymore." He told me everything that happened after I left. How the restaurant fell apart. How the new staff couldn't manage the systems I had put in place. How his mother regretted letting things go so far. I simply nodded. No anger, no judgment. "Do you think we could start over, Claire? Somewhere new. Leave the past behind." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw nothing but a stranger. "No, Daniel. We can't start over. Because I already have. And you're not part of that life." He went silent. That night, I stood at the entrance of the restaurant, now mine as a partner. Margot and her friends arrived, dressed elegantly, faces perfectly made up. They were escorted to a private dining room I had prepared just for them, with soft candlelight, polished silverware, and the most attentive staff. I introduced the menu with a polite smile. Everything was perfect. Until dessert. I stood with a small microphone in hand. "Today is a special day. I'm welcoming some familiar faces. And as a token of appreciation, I have a little gift for each of you." Each guest received an envelope. Inside was my business card with my new title, Partner, Highland Table Restaurant Group. There was also a short note. "The compensation I received from the wrongful termination lawsuit has been fully donated to the Food Allergy Research Fund. Under your names." The room went quiet. So quiet it felt like all the air had been sucked out. I looked straight at Margot. She said nothing. Her face had gone pale. Her lips were trembling. Paula dropped her spoon. Lori mumbled something no one could understand. I gave a small nod. Some jokes. Take a long time to fully understand, but I think today is just the right moment. I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting there. No one laughed. No one said a word. Only the quiet clinking of cutlery against porcelain remained, along with the slow collapse of a scheme that had once shattered me. That night, after all the diners had left, I sat alone in the small office behind the kitchen, holding a warm cup of peppermint tea in my hands. Sophie came in, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey, and placed one in front of me. "So, is it done?" she asked, her eyes full of quiet knowing. I didn't answer right away. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the question linger. I thought about Daniel and the quiet look in his eyes as he signed the divorce papers I had left on the dining table that day. There were no tears, no drama, just 2 signatures that closed a chapter I once thought would last forever. I thought about Margot, the woman who once walked into my life as if she owned it. Now she sat frozen among the same people who once backed her power games, finally realizing she had no control left. I thought about all the people who laughed when I lost my job, when I disappeared without a word, when they were certain I would never recover. Then I finally spoke. "It's not over," I said, "but it's enough." She smiled and clinked her glass against mine. "To new beginnings?" I shook my head gently, a soft smile forming. "To perfect endings." 1 year ago, I left my country with 2 suitcases, a hard drive full of evidence, and a broken heart. I used to believe I was just a victim in someone else's story. But now I'm the one who wrote the ending. And I chose to end it not with rage, but with quiet strength. Tartan Table has become my true home, a space where I can be myself, a place where I am respected and trusted. The staff doesn't call me boss. They call me Claire, the person who stands beside them, not above them. I've started receiving letters from young women in hospitality school. They ask how to run a kitchen, how to survive in an industry full of judgment and pressure. I reply to every single one. Not as an expert, but as someone who has survived. Every morning, I wake up at 6, open the window, and breathe in the sharp morning air over the cobblestone streets. I drink a cup of tea in peace, resting my hand on the wooden table I chose for my little apartment. No one walks in without knocking. No one makes me feel small for being different. And no one gets to tell me how to live my life anymore. Margot never sent another email. Daniel stopped reaching out after a while, too. Maybe they've forgotten me. But I haven't forgotten them. I haven't forgotten what they did. But I've also stopped letting it hold me back. Because I didn't just survive. I lived. A year after walking away from everything, I stood at the window of my small Edinburgh apartment, tea in hand, watching the red rooftops stretch into the afternoon sun. I'm no longer the woman who bowed her head to her mother-in-law. I'm no longer the wife of a man who didn't know how to stand beside me. And I'm definitely not the victim of a cruel little prank disguised as a lesson. I am myself. A new Claire, free, whole, and no longer asking permission to be who I am. As for Margot, she still lives in that same luxurious house, surrounded by the same people who once laughed at my downfall. But now, whenever her name is mentioned, it comes with a large donation to the Food Allergy Research Fund. A donation she didn't give willingly, but one she had to make. Her price for the lie. She was once the reason I lost everything. And I, without shouting or revenge, became the reason she had to face the truth she created. She and I, two women, two directions, two endings. The more she tried to control, the more she lost. The more I let go, the further I rose. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to her side of the story. Here, we share real stories, told from the perspective of women who were once silenced, betrayed, and erased from their own lives. But they stood up, found their voices, and chose an ending that finally made sense. If you saw yourself in this story, click like so we know you're here. Leave a comment. We want to hear your voice too. And subscribe so you can walk alongside more women who are rewriting their lives, one story at a time. This is her side of the story, where every voice is finally heard because every woman deserves to be.